In my last video, I talked about why I use a $700 camera, the Canon R50V. And a lot of you guys ask how I get my footage to look the way that it does. So in this video, I'm gonna break down exactly how I shoot and more importantly, what actually matters when trying to make great videos. So one of the most important, if not the most important factor when it comes to creating good videos is lighting. Literally, if you don't have lighting, you don't have an image. It's gonna be a blank screen. And with lighting, I don't like to overcomplicate things. One, because I don't have a crazy 3 or 4 light setup. And then 2, because a lot of times people don't have access to lights early on. So a lot of times they're lighting their videos out here, out in the sun, you know, just like this. And really, how I like to set up my lighting is just to split my face down the middle. So I have a light side and a shadow side. So if you can angle yourself to where the sun is on one side of your body coming from one way, that's really all you need. Then you just gotta dial in your settings accordingly. And when it comes to actually using lights, if you have them, then that's when I like to put the light off to an angle and do all that other stuff. But we'll get into that in a later video. What I will tell you is to just make sure that you're shooting in good lighting, especially if you have a less expensive camera, or if you don't have a camera like the FX3 something with, you know, crazy specs or something on it. Light is going to be your best friend. So make sure that you get your lighting figured out before you start worrying about dropping bands on cameras. So the next thing we're going to talk about is lens choices. And the type of lens that you use is going to drastically affect the way your image looks and the type of look that you're going for. A wide angle lens and a telefocal, like super zoom lens, are not going to have the same look. Like even with me shooting right now, I have my lens fully zoomed in to 40 millimeters, but it's going to look completely different if I walk up and zoom out. You can see way more, and the background is not as blurry as when I zoom in and step back. So your lens is very important. Now, a lot of people ask, what lens do I use? I have the Sigma 17 to 40 millimeter f1.8 art lens. Now, this lens is 900 bucks. Not everybody has $900 to drop on a lens. So the type of lens that you get really depends on what you shoot. If you shoot personal content, my #1 recommendation was to start with either a zoom lens, just not $900, but start off either with a zoom lens just because you have a lot of room to change your image and how it looks, or get a wide angle lens to start, something like a 16 millimeter or a 10 millimeter, something wide, just because a lot of times you're pretty close to the camera. And if you shoot client work, if you can also, my #1 recommendation is gonna get a zoom lens just because it's the most versatile. But if you can't get a zoom lens, my recommendation would get something like either a 24 millimeter, a 35 millimeter, or a 50 millimeter. The lens really affects, you know, the look that you get, the separation from the background, how much light the lens lets in, the sharpness of the video. And in my personal opinion, I feel like the lens is almost more important than the camera itself. Of course, like the camera affects image quality in a major way, but your lens allows you to push your camera settings, and also it increases like the tack sharpness of your video. So the next thing we're going to talk about is settings. And settings are really important because it doesn't matter what camera you're shooting with or how good you can light or what lens you have. If you don't know how to properly set your settings, your videos are going to be poo regardless. So I'm going to break down a little bit kind of like the basic settings that you need, whether you're filming on an iPhone or you're filming on the best camera in the world, doesn't matter. These are kind of like the basic rule of thumb for settings. Now, this isn't going to be a full settings breakdown because this just isn't that kind of channel where I'm going to clickbait you guys into the best settings to get your videos to look cinematic. This isn't that kind of channel, but I'm going to give you guys the basics and kind of, you know, rules of thumb of what you need to have your settings at. So first thing we're going to jump into when it comes to me shooting my videos, I always shoot my videos in this setting called log. If you are a video creator, you'd be pretty familiar with that term, but if not, log basically means just shooting like a super flat, you know, profiles where the videos look like super gray, there's no life in them, and that is on purpose because when you go into the edit, you can really, you know, add your filters, color it, tweak it, and all that stuff to really make the video pop. So that's why I always shoot in log. A lot of the newer iPhones have it, a lot of the Canon cameras have it, Sony cameras, Nikon, All of the cameras have it, even the DJI Osmo Pockets and those have it. So if your camera can shoot and log, it's going to really help you out in the editing process to make your videos pop. Next, as far as settings, is your frame rate. A lot of the times when I'm shooting videos, I don't slow my videos down at all. So I keep my frame rate at 24 frames per second because it gives you that natural motion blur. See? Natural. You can see how my hands, they blur as I move. It looks natural. It looks natural to the human eye. So I always keep it at 24 frames per second. Now, your shutter speed. The rule of thumb is the 180 shutter rule. So if your frame rate is at 24, your shutter speed needs to be double that, which would be 48, but a lot of cameras don't have that. So just do 1/50. Next, ISO. Basic rule of thumb with ISO is to try to get the ISO as low as you possibly can. Now, a lot of cameras, they have this thing, either their base ISO, or a lot of the newer cameras like the FX3 and stuff like that, they have dual base ISOs, or they have 2 ISOs, which are basically the optimum setting for that camera. So where if you set it at, let's say the Sony FX3, its dual base ISOs is 800 and 12,800. So if you set it at those 2 settings, that's when the camera is gonna look at its absolute best. Now, at my camera, my base ISO is 400. So I try to always keep my camera ISO at 400. So if I set it at 400 and it's too dark, then I'll add in more light. If I set it at 400 and it's too bright, then I'll try to cut out light either by using an ND filter like what I got on now, or some other way to cut down the amount of light that's coming in the camera. Next, aperture. Aperture is basically, that controls what's in focus and what's not because of how blurry the background is, but that also affects your light. The lower that number is, the more light that's being let in, and the less that's gonna be in focus. The higher that number is, the less light that's gonna let in, but the more that's gonna be in focus. Now, me personally, with shooting personal content and client work, I usually try to keep this number as low as possible. So with my lens, it's an f1.8. So I try to keep my aperture at f1.8 as much as possible. Now, sometimes you just can't because it lets in too much light. So I'll dial it back a little bit just to make sure that my video isn't overexposed. So what I usually will recommend is whatever lens you have, try to keep that aperture as low as possible. And that's why ND filters are so important, especially when shooting outside. It allows you to cut out light to be able to keep your settings the way you want them to be. And the last thing we're gonna talk about settings wise is your white balance. The white balance is really just more so with colors, and it'll show you, how warm or how cool your video is. Now, me personally, a lot of camera people are going to hate me for this one, but starting off and really for like my first couple years, I shot in auto white balance. A lot of people say, oh, don't shoot in auto white balance, it's gonna mess up your colors. When you're first starting out, no one really knows how to set your white balance manually. So me personally, if you're not like too, tech savvy, slap on auto white balance, you'll be good. Because at the end of the day, if it messes up a little bit, you can fix it in the editing. But if you do know how to set it, I use an app on my phone called CineTemp. I seen it from another videographer. I use an app called CineTemp where I literally just hold my phone up no matter where I'm at, and it's gonna tell me exactly what I need to set that to, and that's how I do it. So the last thing we're gonna get into is a little bit of my secret sauce on how I create my videos, and not like the clinical techie stuff. First thing we want to talk about is color grading. Now, I try not to make color grading too complicated because no one wants to spend hours color grading videos. So I use 2 different LUT packs to color grade my videos, and in my color grading process is literally 2 steps. So first LUT pack that I use is from a guy called Adrian Per. I'm pretty sure a lot of people have seen his face before because he's pretty popular on Instagram. But go to his website. I bought his LUT pack. It was like 45 bucks, and definitely great investment, highly recommended. But that's the first one I use. And then the second one is from this company called Editor's Keys. I bought their LUT pack. I think it was like $20-ish, somewhere around there. I bought the little Pro Cinematic LUT pack, bought theirs, and those are the 2 that I use. And literally all I do is drop my footage in there, add the first LUT pack on there from Adrian Per, then add the second one on there from Editor's Keys, and that's literally it. That's all I do. And since I import my LUTs into my monitor, I already see exactly what it's gonna look like from the monitor. So I'm literally just taking that from the monitor and just copying it onto my footage, and that's literally all I do for all of my videos. So another thing that I try to make sure that I emphasize on in my videos is capturing B-roll for both my personal content and for clients. Capturing B-roll helps you tell your story, whether it's your own personal story or somebody else's, as you know, client work, things like that. And I know it can be very tedious, especially for your own personal content, constantly setting up the camera in different angles and recording yourself doing the same thing over and over again in different angles. It can be tedious, but it helps you tell a better story. And if you can tell a good story, you can get views, you can get clients, you can get people to pay you, and you can eventually, you know, make money and buy all the gear that you want. But if you cannot tell a good story or keep people engaged, keep people intrigued in what you're talking about, you're not gonna be able to buy anything. You're not gonna be able to make any money. No one's gonna wanna book you. No one's gonna watch your stuff if you can't tell a good story. Now, a lot of people, you know, you don't need to have a whole bunch of B-roll, but you know, popping in every now and then, because you know, it just changes the pace. But capturing B-roll, and what I mean by capturing B-roll, how do you do that? Capturing B-roll is just capturing stuff that relates to what you're talking about. Like for me, capturing B-roll, like just earlier, I'm talking about color grading, capturing me actually doing it, close-ups of the screen, close-ups of my eyeballs looking at the monitor. And they don't always have to be close-ups. They can be close, they can be medium, they can be wide. You also need to switch it up so that, you know, the viewer's not looking at the same the same type of shot every time. Switch it up and, you know, randomize it a little bit just to keep the viewer or keep whoever it is on their toes and intrigued on what you're actually talking about. That's gonna be more important than any camera or any piece of gear that you can buy. The last thing we're gonna talk about is shooting with intention and having a plan when you're shooting. Whether you're shooting for yourself or shooting for a client, intentionally knowing what you're gonna shoot when you go out there is gonna be more important than any piece of gear that you can buy. You can have the best gear, but if you're going out there shooting blind, you're gonna be shooting forever, and you're just gonna hate the whole experience. So having like at least some form of a general idea of what you're gonna shoot, what shots you need, is going to make your video creation process way easier. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go out with a whole storyboard and have everything written down to the T every time you go shoot a video, but even having like a vague plan of what the video is about and, you know, a couple key points, a couple key shots that you need is going to really help you be able to create great videos. So that was just a couple key things that I want to touch on about how I create my videos and what actually matters when it comes to creating good videos. And honestly, I'm still learning things myself. With me trying to build a video business, you know, stay consistent here on YouTube and juggle a lot of things going on in life, I'm still learning. And I've been making some decisions lately that a lot of creatives don't really talk about. And that's what we're gonna talk about in my next video. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that one, and I'll see y'all next time.